I sat there, in the shadow of a lavish banquet hall, in a five-star hotel in Chicago, staring at the cold sandwich on the plate before me. It was my sister Vanessa's wedding, and this was all they thought I deserved. My mother, an expensive silk shawl wrapped around her neck, approached, her lips pursed into a forced smile. "This is enough for you, Ellie," she said, her tone beneficent. Vanessa, the bride in her sparkling gown, swept past my table, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. She glanced at me, her lips curled, and whispered, "Quiet as usual, huh?" I sat alone, with no seat card, no drink, no name on the guest list, just a dry sandwich, as forgotten as I was. I had two choices: leave quietly, find a hidden corner in the bathroom to hide the tears they expected me to shed, or stand up and show them I wasn't as invisible as they thought. I chose to wait. Throughout the ceremony, I listened to empty speeches about eternal love and family bonds, lies wrapped in glitter. As the microphone was passed from table to table, I stood, calm, my hands steady. "Let's watch something memorable," I said, my voice clear and resonant in the hushed room. The lights dimmed, and the big screen at the back of the stage lit up. I handed a small USB stick to the technician, and with a click, everything began to fall apart. What appeared was more than a video, it was the truth. The dirty secret they thought I would keep forever. My sister Vanessa began to stagger, her hands clutching the tablecloth. My mother sucked in a breath, her face white. The groom, frozen as a statue, stared at the screen. The guests whispered, their eyes oscillating between shock and curiosity. In 3 short minutes, I had changed everything. You think this is just another family drama? No, this is the story of a perfect wedding gone wrong, of the moment an invisible person decides to speak up. Stay with me, because this is not revenge. This is justice, and it has only just begun. I'm Ellie Harper, 36, and I live alone in a small 4th-floor apartment in Chicago's Logan Square neighborhood. For the past 10 years, I've been a freelance writer, not the flashy copywriter who churns out big-name ads or best-selling novels, but a quiet storyteller who chronicles everyday moments. My articles often feature street vendors, the weary eyes of a night bus driver, or the innocent smiles of children playing in a public park. My work isn't prestigious, but it's real. In a world full of facades, I find value in telling the truth. I rarely mentioned my family, not because I was angry or wanted to cut them off, but because silence was more comfortable than the judgmental stares I had grown accustomed to. That afternoon, I sat in my small work corner, the autumn light streaming through the window, editing an article about an old seamstress who had made wedding dresses for 3 generations. As I typed each word, my mind drifted away, not to the warm story before me, but to a memory that never took shape, a family portrait that I had never belonged to. I was always the youngest, a shadow of my older sister, Vanessa. Vanessa had the perfect smile, the confidence that drew everyone's attention. She was the star of school speeches, the recipient of praise at family charity parties. Meanwhile, I stood in the background, quietly jotting down notes in my notebook, often forgotten. My mother, Lorraine, used to say, "Vanessa was born to lead, Ellie. Just try not to mess things up." Those words, though gentle, were ingrained in me from a young age. I remember my 8th birthday. I stood in the park near my house, wearing the dress my mother had picked out, holding a red balloon, waiting for the party she had promised. No one showed up. After an hour, I realized my mother had taken Vanessa to a television commercial audition downtown. I walked home quietly, the balloon dangling beside me, feeling more empty than the untouched cake in my bag. Years later, on my high school graduation day, I stood in my borrowed graduation gown, watching other families hug, give flowers, take pictures. I waited, hoping that Lorraine, or my father, Henry, would show up, but they didn't. Finally, a former teacher, Mrs. Miller, offered to drive me home. I sat in the car, looking out the window, telling myself that I was used to being left behind. They had gone to see Vanessa perform at a big charity event downtown. "We thought your graduation was the weekend," my mother, Lorraine, said later on the phone, her voice soft, as if a half-hearted apology might erase the emptiness inside me. I sat back at my desk, staring at the unfinished paragraph on my laptop screen, the words about the old tailor fading away. I stood up and walked out into the small hallway of the apartment, where a Christmas card from last year was still taped to a pinboard. In it, Lorraine and my father, Henry, were smiling brightly alongside Vanessa and her fiancé, Nathan, on a luxury yacht. They were dressed in white, the flash of lights highlighting the champagne glasses in their hands. I wasn't in that photo, never had been, not in any of the cards our family had sent over the years. There were no loud arguments or dramatic exits in the Harper household. My exclusion was subtle, polite, but cold and consistent. Lorraine had always put perfection first. She had built her family into a carefully orchestrated picture, and I, with my quiet writing and modest life, did not fit into that picture. So I was left out, without reproach, but without pity either. My father, Henry, never objected. He was a quiet man, spending most of his time in his home office, reading financial papers or fielding calls from business associates. The rare times he spoke to me, his voice was dry, as if he were reading a report rather than talking to his daughter. My father Henry's words were always dry, as if he were reading a financial report rather than chatting in a living room. My sister Vanessa was never childishly cruel. No taunts, no arguments. She simply did not see me, as if I existed in a hidden corner, close enough to be called a sister, but too obscure to enter her brilliant world. The only memories we shared were from childhood, when Vanessa had not yet realized she could shine without sharing the spotlight. The photographs we took together are now yellowed, locked away in the memory where I was once part of the frame. That afternoon, I opened a drawer in my desk and took out an old wooden box where I kept scraps of paper and notes that I had never shown to anyone. I flipped through them, handwritten notes from my days in the family home outside Chicago. One described my mother, Lorraine, sitting by the window with her morning coffee, her eyes far away. Another described the hallway leading to my father's study, where the door was always closed. One described Vanessa's silver trophy, glistening on the living room shelf, where she had won an oratorical award. They weren't stories, they were memories, quiet, private, but haunting. They were how I remembered what it was like to grow up in that house, where I existed but no one really saw. I set the box down, my eyes drifting to the calendar on the wall. A dark red circle marked Saturday Vanessa's wedding. I hadn't decided whether to go or not. Part of me wanted to stay away, but another, deeper part whispered that maybe it was time to face it, not for their sake, but for mine. A week ago, I received a thick envelope, sealed with red wax, with the words, "Miss Ellie Harper," written in elaborate silver ink. Not Darling or even Ellie, just a distant name, as if I were a casual acquaintance. There was no note inside, no handwriting, just a cold invitation, reminding me that I didn't really belong to this family, but that my absence would upset them. I left it on the small kitchen table in my Chicago apartment, staring at it, struggling between the rational urge to stay and a deep, long-buried urge to show up not for them, but for myself. I found the envelope in the mailbox 2 days after I reluctantly decided to attend. The invitation exuded luxury. Even before I opened it, the paper was thick and glossy, with VN curled into the corners like a high-end brand logo. Vanessa had a knack for making anything look flashy, even an invitation. I took it inside, set it on the table, and hesitated for a long time before using a paper cutter to slice open the wax. The card inside was a work of art, cream-colored paper, gold lettering that sparkled in the morning light. The Harper and Townsend families cordially invite you to the wedding of Vanessa, Claire Harper, and Nathan James Townsend, it read. The ceremony would take place at the prestigious Peninsula Chicago Hotel, followed by a reception in the Grand Room, complete with champagne. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly, not in surprise but in resignation. Of course it was the peninsula, a symbol of Chicago's upper class, where every detail, from the crystal chandeliers to the silk tablecloths, screamed wealth and power. And of course Nathan Townsend, the heir to a long-standing real estate family, with his perfect smile and discreet connections. Vanessa always knew how to rise, always held herself at the top, never let herself fall to the ground. The phone rang a few minutes later. It was my mother, Lorraine. "Ellie, I assume you got an invitation?" Her voice was soft but sharp, as if she were checking an item off a to-do list. "Yes, I got it," I said. "Good," she said. "Dress appropriately this time. This is a formal event, not your coffee shop poetry reading." I bit my lip and didn't answer, letting the silence speak for me. "This is a high-class wedding, Ellie, not a gathering in your old bookstore." My mother, Lorraine, continued, her voice as sharp as a silk-wrapped knife. I let the silence drag on, then said, "Don't worry, I won't draw attention to myself. I'll be a corner." Lorraine didn't smile. She never smiled when I responded with sarcasm. "Vanessa's wedding is a big Harper event," she said, her voice deadpan. "The Townsends aren't people we want to offend. You're not the one marrying them, but you still carry the family name. Don't embarrass us. And don't wear jeans this time." I almost reminded her that the only time I wore jeans was when I had to rush from an out-of-town interview to a Christmas dinner, but it was no use. Lorraine had hung up. That afternoon, while I was editing a story for a local magazine, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Her tone, as usual, was a mixture of sweet and demanding. "Hey, Ellie! I'm so glad you're coming. Just a little something. Could you write a short story about the wedding? Just a few sentimental lines, no big deal. You're a great storyteller, and I thought it would be special if you did it, since you're family. Oh, and it's free. Haha." I stared at the screen, almost hearing Vanessa's voice accentuating the word free, as if it were a joke, as if the request weren't a blatant exploitation. My fingers flew over the keyboard, considering saying no outright. But I knew that if I did, Lorraine would call back, with veiled accusations of selfishness, of never helping my sister despite Vanessa's love for me. I had replayed the conversation 100 times in my head. So finally, I replied briefly but firmly. "Thanks for thinking of me, but this time I'd like to come as a guest." Vanessa didn't reply, and I wasn't surprised. That evening, as dusk tinted the Chicago sky orange and gray, I stood in my small kitchen, pouring a cup of chamomile tea, the scent of which wafted through the air. The phone rang, an unfamiliar number on the screen. I hesitated before answering, my voice slightly wary. "Ellie Harper." The voice on the other end was bright and professional. "Hello, Miss Harper. This is Margaret Voss's assistant, Horizon Literary Magazine. We are pleased to announce that your article has been selected for our spring issue, Quiet Stories. Margaret said you have a rare, honest, uncompromising voice." My heart skipped a beat. I had submitted the article, a series of short stories about ordinary people, from a morning janitor to an old woman selling flowers on the side of the road nearly a year ago, without much expectation. I had written it to relieve myself, to record what I saw, rather than to be recognized. Now, this opportunity had come like a ray of light in the darkness. "Thank you." I tried to keep my voice even. "I really didn't expect it," the assistant continued. "You'll get an email confirming the details, but Miss Sext Voss wanted me to call you directly to say that she believes you have a special talent." When the call ended, I stood in the apartment, my hand pressed to my chest, as if to hold on to the moment. I picked up the phone and called my mother, Lorraine. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice weary. "Ellie, what's up?" I took a breath, trying to sound bright. "Mom, I have some good news. My article was chosen for Horizon Magazine by Margaret Voss." There was a long, cold pause. "Oh, that's great, Ellie," she said, her voice even. Listen, I'm busy putting together the guest list for Vanessa's wedding. Can we talk later? The line went dead. I slowly put the phone down, without a sound. In front of me were two possibilities. One was Vanessa's gorgeous wedding, printed on gold foil, carrying the coldness of the family. The other was Horizon's acknowledgement, written with my sincerity and effort. I knew which one was truly mine. The Peninsula Chicago Hotel glowed in the pale early winter light, its facade gleaming with white marble columns and polished brass-trimmed windows. I stepped out of the taxi, my silver-gray form-fitting dress fluttering around my ankles as a chill breeze blew across the hotel's plaza. The dress was simple, no sparkle, no embellishments, just delicate cuts, true to my style, discreet but not invisible. I adjusted the strap of my small handbag, took a deep breath to steady myself, and stepped through the ornate revolving doors. Inside, the main hall was as grand as a palace, with guests gathered in groups, dressed in expensive clothes. Men in tuxedos, women in evening gowns and glittering heels clicking on the marble floor. The air was filled with polite laughter, carefully rehearsed greetings, and the scent of expensive perfume. I stood still in a corner, my eyes wandering to the vases of white roses, arranged elaborately along the grand staircase. Vanessa had always loved roses, a symbol of purity, though I knew that was just the facade she liked to wear. A young woman, wearing a wireless headset and holding a clipboard, approached with a professional smile. "Miss Harper? Welcome. Please follow me. I will show you to your seat." I nodded, following her down the thick red carpet. As we passed through the ornate entrance to the ballroom, I assumed my seat would be near the back. I had no illusions about my place in the family. But as she led me down a side hallway, past the main entrance to the ballroom, and into a secluded corner near the fire exit, I felt my stomach tighten. "You're here?" she said, pointing to a small round table, just big enough for one. On the table was a name tag that said Ellie Harper in front of an empty plate. The table was next to a coat rack, under the flickering light of a neon green exit sign. It was far enough from the main room to feel forgotten, but close enough that I could still hear the soft violins from the orchestra in the ballroom. The other tables sparkled with candles, silk tablecloths, and crystal glasses. Mine was bare, without a single decoration. I sat down slowly, adjusting the hem of my skirt in my lap, and then noticed a detail. A small china plate in the center of the table, with a cold sandwich on it. No filling, no butter, no explanation. I blinked, thinking it must be a mistake. I turned, looking for a waiter, but there was none. Instead of a waiter, I saw my mother, Lorraine, approach, a silhouette on a still lake. She wore a pearl-colored silk dress, a diamond necklace that sparkled in the light, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, not a strand out of place. She smiled, but her eyes were cold, devoid of warmth. "Ellie, dear," she said, her voice sweet as fake honey. "I'm glad you came. You look comfortable." I looked at her, not responding, remaining silent as a shield. Lorraine leaned in, lowering her voice just enough to be inaudible. "I see you've found your place. With all that freelance writing, I think this sandwich suits you, simple, understated." She gestured toward the cold sandwich on her plate, as if introducing a delicate dish. "This is something you're used to, isn't it?" I clenched my fists under the table, but kept my face impassive, not letting her see any wavering. Lorraine stood there for a few more seconds, her eyes waiting for me to react, then turned and walked away, her silk dress gliding across the floor, not waiting for an answer. A few minutes later, the music changed to a softer tune, signaling Vanessa's arrival. She walked near the entrance of the banquet hall, in a tailored wedding dress, the organza and pearl lace hugging her body like a work of art. She was radiant, like a goddess out of a painting, causing the crowd to erupt in polite applause. Vanessa glided past the tables, her perfect smile unflattering, and stopped at the end of the hallway, right in front of my table. She tilted her head, looking at me with false sweetness, as if comforting someone at a funeral. "Hey, sis," Vanessa said, her lips curving into a thin smile. "I'm glad you came. You made it." She glanced down at the sandwich on the table, then at the empty chair, and finally at me. "Your dress is cute, so simple, so your style." There was a long silence between us. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice low, soft but sharp as a needle. "You know," she said, "I've always admired the way you make things look cheap. It's a talent, making even the simplest things look cheap." I looked her straight in the eye, not responding. Vanessa had never understood the value of honesty, and I didn't attempt to explain. Instead, I reached silently into my purse, slowly pulling out a small silver USB drive. I didn't hold it up in defiance, nor did I flaunt it as a threat. I just held it in my palm, my thumb gently brushing against its cool surface. Vanessa's smile faltered, just for a moment, but I saw the strain in her eyes. "Enjoy your evening," she said, her voice strained, and turned to walk into the ballroom. The train of her gorgeous dress caught on a gilded chair, making a small squeak before she straightened it and continued walking. I was left alone, sitting at a small table by the fire exit, the neon green light from the sign flickering overhead. I looked down at the cold sandwich on my plate, untouched, unbuttered, unseasoned, unexplained. I did not touch it. Instead, my gaze was drawn to the bright lights of the banquet hall, where laughter and clinking glasses echoed. I was not waiting for food, nor for conversation. I was waiting for the moment when my silence would speak louder than any words my family had ever uttered. That sandwich, in its coldness and insignificance, was more than food. It was a symbol of all I had endured, and it reminded me that my time was coming. Sitting alone by the fire escape, I gently squeezed the silver USB drive in my hand, feeling the weight of a decision that had been brewing for weeks. Would I use what I held? Now, in the quiet before the speeches, my mind drifted back to the night it all began to unravel. It had been 3 weeks earlier, at a private Townsend family engagement party for Vanessa and Nathan, held in a ballroom on the top floor of a luxury hotel overlooking the Chicago River. The event was more than a celebration of love, it was a display of power and status. Vanessa had insisted that I bring my laptop just to capture some candid moments, she said with a small smile, to make Mom happy. I had come with my compact laptop, more out of habit as a writer than out of necessity. I didn't want to draw attention, and I had learned to pick my battles carefully. All evening, I stood in a corner, taking in the little details. The glint of light on wine glasses, the sound of children laughing under the chandeliers, Nathan gliding through the crowd with the grace of a well-trained heir. I knew how to be invisible, and I liked it. My silence was my strength, my pen and paper, my shield. Near the end of the party, when most of the guests had gone out to the terrace to watch the light show by the river, I returned to the deserted ballroom to check my notes. That's when I saw Vanessa, alone near the bar, phone lit in hand, face tense. She didn't notice me standing behind a thick velvet curtain, quietly typing away. Out of habit, I turned on my computer, turned on low-level recording not to spy, but to record my own thoughts about the atmosphere. But then I heard her voice, low, urgent, on a call she thought no one would hear. I stopped typing, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and listened. Vanessa typed rapidly on her phone, her brows furrowed, her lips pursed. Then she paused, reading something and smiling faintly. I couldn't make out the message, but when she leaned in, the light from the screen flickered, enough for me to catch a line before it disappeared. "Tonight, for the last time, it's not Nathan." The message was bold, personal, and dangerous. Vanessa glanced around, not seeing me behind the curtain, then put her phone in her bag and walked quickly toward the private elevator. She disappeared through the shiny metal doors without a word. I hesitated, my heart pounding, but then instinct told me to follow. Not to confront, I didn't want to make a scene, but to understand. I walked down the stairs, quietly, 2 stories, to the hotel's underground parking lot. I knew Vanessa's car, A sleek black convertible my father Henry had given her when she graduated from college. It was parked alone in the far corner, near the side entrance. I stood in the shadows, breathing softly and slowly in the cold concrete air. The laptop was still open in my hand, recording still running, though I didn't know why I hadn't turned it off. A few minutes passed, and then a dark gray SUV rolled up, stopping right next to Vanessa's Filt. A man got out tall, in a tailored jacket, his hair neatly combed, his gait confident. I recognized him immediately. Lucas Bennett, a business associate of Nathan's. I'd met him at a charity event. Charming, smooth. But there was something about his smoothness that made me uncomfortable. Vanessa opened the car door, stepped out, and without hesitation, threw herself into his arms. Their kiss was slow, deep, with the familiarity of a long relationship, not the rush of a new romance. I didn't mean to do anything, but my hands moved before my mind could process them. I opened the video app on my phone, held it low so I wouldn't be seen, and pressed record. I didn't zoom in. There was no need. It was close enough to capture what was happening enough that I would never forget. They spoke briefly, in low voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The recording was still going on, and I knew I had something bigger than I could have ever imagined. Vanessa chuckled, smoothed Lucas's jacket, and the two of them disappeared into the back of a sleek black convertible. The door closed, the click echoing dryly in the parking lot. I turned off the recording on my phone, stood still for a moment, my breath coming in gasps. Then I turned away, not looking back, and walked out of the darkness of the parking lot. For days, I didn't show the video to anyone. I told myself it was none of my business. Maybe Vanessa had her reasons. And no matter how cold our relationship had become, I didn't want to be the one to ruin a wedding. I saved the clip to an anonymous folder on my computer, buried it under a pile of work documents, and tried to forget about it, until today. Until I showed up to my sister's wedding, in my carefully chosen silver gray dress, only to be pushed into a corner near the fire escape like a stranger. Until my mother, Lorraine, swept past, giving me a cold smile as if I were not her daughter. Until Vanessa, in her white lace, stood before me, sneering at me with undisguised smugness. Until that cold sandwich was placed before me, a final affirmation of my place in the family. At that moment, I knew I had to act. This wasn't revenge, not exactly. It wasn't anger that drove me, but a razor-sharp clarity. After years of being ignored, dismissed, laughed at, I didn't want to fight. I wanted a reckoning. As the orchestra played the final notes of the overture and the clink of cutlery joined the party, I clenched the USB in my hand. It held more than just the parking lot footage. My phone had picked up more than I thought it would that night: whispers, hushed conversations at the engagement party, things Vanessa and my mother thought no one else would hear. It was all there. And tonight, everyone would know. The day after the wedding rehearsal, Chicago began to transform into early spring, the chill gone and replaced by a gentle warmth. I drove in silence to the old house I had called home, a modernist with a pale gray facade and large windows, in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Evanston. The oak trees in the yard were budding, and the azalea bushes my mother, Lorraine, had bragged about were in full bloom. Some things never change. I had come here for a simple reason: to talk privately with my father, Henry. He had always been a man of few words, never mocking my writing dreams, nor supporting them. I held out a small hope that he would listen, that perhaps he didn't know everything, that maybe, just maybe, he still had feelings for me. I parked at the end of the driveway, carrying my small purse and my phone, which I had kept with me since the wedding. I walked to the side entrance and punched in the code. Lorraine never changed it. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine and peppermint. I paused in the hallway, about to call out to my father, when I heard voices from the glass-fronted living room overlooking the garden. Lorraine's name was mentioned, then mine. I slowed my pace, my soft shoes making no sound on the wooden floor. "Don't worry," Lorraine said, her voice calm and sharp as a negotiator's. "I've transferred the Lake Geneva vacation home and the majority of the inheritance to you. Henry doesn't know anything." Vanessa's voice cut in, lower but determined. "Are you sure? Because after the wedding, I want everything settled quickly. We can't let Dad get suspicious," Lorraine replied, confidently. "He hasn't looked at the financial papers in a decade. He thinks the family lawyers are handling it, everything's sorted." There was a faint clink, coffee cups hitting china. "Maybe," and then Lorraine continued, lower but clear. "This is for our benefit, Vanessa." "To us, the Harper women," Lorraine said, raising her voice as if toasting. "You've done more for our future with this marriage than Ellie could ever do with her writing in a lifetime." I heard Vanessa chuckle. A little, sharp laugh. "After the wedding, I'll take control the accounts, the trust fund, the estate, everything. I'll take care of you, and you can retire comfortably. No more pretending to Dad, no more coaxing Ellie into settling down in Chicago with her writing career." Lorraine laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Ellie won't last. She was always a phase, not the future of the family." There was a long pause, broken only by the tapping of Vanessa's fingernails on the glass table. "Do you think she suspects anything?" she asked, her voice lower. Lorraine said immediately, "I doubt she has the brains to know. She still thinks honesty counts, poor girl. Maybe she believes love and effort are enough." They both laughed, louder, as if sharing a secret the world knew but me. I stood still, breathing shallowly, a throbbing pain starting to spread from my temples. My hand silently pulled the phone from my coat pocket, opened the voice recorder, and pressed the button. My fingers trembled slightly, not with anger, but with the painful clarity of the moment. This wasn't just family cruelty, it was a carefully concealed plot, a theft of my legacy, wrapped in fake smiles. I heard Vanessa's high heels clicking across the hardwood floor. "I don't even love Nathan," she said, her voice almost to herself. "But this is how power works. A Townsend marriage, it's a ticket to any boardroom in Chicago. I taught you to take advantage, to put your feelings aside. It is actions for which ing pays us." "Exactly," Lorraine said, her voice full of pride. "She's doing well. And Ellie," Vanessa interjected dryly, "she's just a backdrop, like the old rug in the living room. We keep her close so no one dares say we're being insensitive." "But after the wedding," Vanessa said, her voice sharp, "we'll drop the polite facade. There's no need to keep Ellie in the family picture." Lorraine replied, her voice soft but calculating. "I agree. No more invitations, no more forced parties. It'll fade away, and we'll move on." I blinked, fighting back the bitterness that rose up. Not because of their words I was used to indifference, but because of the stark truth behind them. This wasn't jealousy. This was sanity. My mother and sister weren't just heartless. They were pulling the strings, concocting a plan to remove me from the legacy, to silence me, to erase anyone who didn't serve their interests. I glanced down at my phone, the timer ticking up. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Their conversation drifted to mundane topics, the weekend brunch menu, Vanessa's honeymoon plans. I backed away, stepping softly across the wooden floor, toward the side door. I didn't slam the door, didn't cry, and didn't feel the weight of betrayal that would come later. For now, all I knew was that I held a recording in my hands, and soon they would face an audience they didn't expect. The ballroom at the Peninsula Chicago was ablaze with light crystal chandeliers glinting overhead, reflecting off the white silk linens and gold-rimmed menus on the tables. Waiters glided silently, pouring champagne into crystal glasses and clearing away empty dessert plates. There was an eerie stillness, as if everyone were waiting for the next moment of the ceremony. At the main table, Nathan rose, raising his glass with a perfect smile, flanked by his father, Charles Townsend, a man with a deep broadcaster's voice and the bearing of a tycoon. "With the joining of two families," Charles said, pausing to let the clink of glasses echo in the silence. May Nathan and Vanessa's future be as strong as their reputation. The applause was polite and rhythmic. The master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, flipping through a small stack of cards. Before we conclude tonight's ceremony, we have a special toast from the bride's sister, Ellie Harper. A ripple of whispers rippled through the room. Vanessa's smile faltered for the first time all evening. Lorraine, a few seats away, stiffened, her hand tightening on her napkin. I stood, my simple but elegant silver-gray dress catching the light from the chandelier in a soft glow. I held no glass, no note, just walked forward with slow, sure steps. I looked out at the crowd, my voice clear and unwavering. I appreciate the opportunity, I began, but I'm not here to toast tonight. I'm not here to offer platitudes or scripted sentimentality. I paused, feeling everyone's eyes on me. I'm here to share something else, something more genuine, something long overdue. Vanessa sat up straight, whispering urgently to Lorraine. What's it doing? I held the small silver USB between my fingers, handing it to the tech near the stage, my eyes never leaving the crowd. I want to share a video, I said, my voice calm but clear. Play it. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, and the large screen behind the main table lowered. The atmosphere shifted from polite curiosity to stifling tension. I stepped aside, arms folded across my chest, standing still. The first shot came into sharp focus. Vanessa in the darkness of the underground parking lot, jacket draped over her arm, phone glowing in the darkness. A text message flashed across the screen, enlarged for all to read. Tonight, for the last time, it's not Nathan. Murmurs rippled through the room like small waves. The next shot was grainy but clear. Vanessa and a man, Lucas Bennett, got into the back seat of her car, arms entwined, lips meeting in a deep kiss. Some of the guests turned away, others stared at the screen, frozen. Nathan sat motionless, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Then the scene cut, this time with sound. Lorraine's voice came through the speakers, sharp. I transferred the house in Lake Geneva and the shares to you. Henry doesn't know anything, Vanessa replied, chuckling. After the wedding, everything is yours. You can retire. I'll take care of it from here. In the darkness, I saw Henry, my father, slowly rise, eyes fixed on the screen, his face hard. Vanessa jumped up, her voice shaking with panic. Turn it off! This is private. This is edited. It's slander. But the video kept playing. Lorraine's laughter mixing with Vanessa's, a cacophony of greed and smugness, revealing their treacherous plans. Then, just before the screen went dark, another voice rang out, not from the speakers. The room turned as Lucas Bennett, in a black suit, entered from a side entrance. He approached with deliberate calm, his eyes piercing. Vanessa's eyes widened, her face pale. What are you doing here? She whispered. Lucas ignored her, turning to the crowd, looking straight at Nathan and the Townsends. I was invited to the engagement party, he said, his voice flat. I didn't know I was just a pawn. She said it was just a night of fun, nothing more. But now I see her game. The room was silent, save for my heart pounding in my chest. But it's clear that I was just a tool, someone who was used to hurt people. Lucas Bennett continued, his voice sharp and unwavering. I knew Vanessa would twist things, so I recorded our conversations. I have everything, texts, plans, everything. Vanessa shook her head violently, her voice almost shouting, He's lying, he's obsessed with me. Lucas looked at her, his eyes losing all warmth for the first time that evening. Vanessa, there was a time when I loved you, if only fleetingly. But what you did to your sister, to your father, to your fiancé. He turned to Nathan, his voice low. You deserve the truth, not an act. The screen went black. The lights came back on, but the room was silent. No clink of cutlery, no whispers. In that moment, the truth stood out, past the white silks, the crystal glasses, and the glittering reputation my family had worked so hard to build. Vanessa sat down, her face pale, her hands shaking. Lorraine bowed her head, not daring to look at anyone. Nathan stood, his eyes cold on Vanessa before he turned and walked out of the room without a word. In the heavy silence, I felt a breath of fresh air, not victory, but release. Nathan Townsend stood still for a moment, his fingers trembling at his sides as Lucas Bennett's final words faded over the speakers. The entire ballroom froze, as if the magnificent crystal chandeliers above had stopped twinkling to watch. Vanessa was no longer screaming, but her face was smeared with mascara, her shoulders slumped as if she were shrinking away from a world that had just turned its back on her. Lorraine sat beside him, her lips pressed into a straight line, colorless, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. Then Nathan stood. He didn't look at Vanessa, or at the crowd. Instead, he slowly slid the white gold ring off his ring finger, the one he'd been wearing less than 2 hours ago. He held it between his thumb and index finger, staring at it as if it were a foreign object. "I fell in love with a lie in a wedding dress," he said, his voice low but clear in the silent room, like a death knell. He laid the ring down on the table, gently but firmly, on the white silk napkin, and turned to his parents. Charles Townsend and his wife, Eleanor, had remained stoic throughout the drama, but now Charles's jaw was tight, his eyes hard. He stood beside his son, tall and imposing, looking directly at Lorraine. "This marriage is not just a union between two people," he said, his voice low and steady. "It is a business alliance that our family values. But deception is not a value we accept in any partnership." Lorraine opened her mouth to object, but Charles cut her off with a look that was as sharp as a knife, entitling her to no excuses. Charles Townsend continued, his voice as cold as steel. "The Townsend Group is officially withdrawing from all partnerships and pending agreements with Harper Enterprises, effective immediately. All negotiations are cancelled." The statement carried more weight than anything I had said or done. Murmurs spread from the financial and social guests. They knew what it meant. The Harper family's reputation was collapsing not only socially but financially, and the collapse was coming quickly. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking. Nathan said nothing more, turning away from the main table. His mother, Eleanor, following silently, placing a hand on his shoulder as if to steady him. Lorraine shot up, the chair behind her crashing to the floor with a deafening crash. "This is your fault!" she shouted, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at me, shaking with rage. "You orchestrated this. You ruined my daughter's wedding, ruined everything we built." But the crowd no longer paid her any attention. Guests began to stand, grabbing their coats, their purses, their remaining dignity. The whispers rippled through the trees like a breeze, soft but clear. "She didn't deserve this," one woman whispered as she passed me. "I didn't expect Vanessa to be like this," another said, her voice filled with disappointment. A man whispered to his wife as he passed, "No wonder Ellie never shows up at family functions." Lorraine, now seated, shouted into the distance, her voice hoarse and shrill, "This isn't over yet. Do you know who we are? We're the Harpers." No one answered. The orchestra had long since stopped, leaving only the rustle of skirts, the scuffling of chairs, and the slow footsteps of guests who had seen enough. I stood still, my hands at my sides, my eyes unfocused on anything in particular. The silence was no longer the burden of shame, but the release of a decision made. I didn't feel triumphant, just relieved, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from my chest. In the distance, near the now black video screen, my father, Henry, sat there, motionless. He hadn't said a word since the video had started. His tie was slightly loose, his eyes dull and lost. As the guests filed out of the ballroom and the Harper family name crumbled under the weight of the secrets revealed, he finally turned to look at me. Our eyes met, no comfort, no apology, no anger, just a long, unreadable look from a father who had just realized his legacy was built on fragile sand. I said nothing, but in my heart, I knew clearly, my autumn had begun. The ballroom at the Peninsula Chicago was empty, the faint scent of white roses and vanilla wafting through the air. Waiters quietly cleared away, sifting through the remains of what had once been a perfect wedding. Half-empty champagne glasses and untouched plates of pastries lay scattered across the tables. Lorraine's voice had long since died away, perhaps from exhaustion or inability to accept the truth. Vanessa was gone. Gone. I stood near the stage, my silver-gray dress slightly wrinkled, my face impassive, even as my mind reeled from what had just happened. I paid no attention to the woman in the dark blue coat until a voice called my name, soft but assertive. Ellie Harper. Startled, I looked up and recognized Margaret Voss, whom I hadn't seen in person since our email exchange more than a year ago. Her salt and pepper hair was tied back, and her hands, in black silk gloves, held a small clutch, as if she had just stepped out of a literary event. She didn't smile politely, but instead looked at me with a sharp gaze, as if assessing something unexpected. "Margaret," I said, unable to hide my surprise. "I didn't know you were here," Margaret replied with a thin smile. "I wasn't invited, but gossip travels fast in literary circles, especially when there's a drama wrapped in silk and scandal." I didn't know how to respond. The last time we spoke, Margaret had commented on my Horizon article. "Your writing was sharp, your technique good, but I didn't see the depth, the daring to dig into the pain." The comment had made me cringe, though I politely thanked her and withdrew. Now Margaret looked around the chaotic banquet room, her eyes reading a story yet to be written. "I saw the video," Margaret Voss said, needing no preamble. "I was standing in the back, watching the whole thing." I lowered my eyes, feeling a little uncomfortable. "It wasn't a piece or a prepared story," I replied. Margaret tilted her head, her voice soft but firm, making it impossible for me not to listen. "Whether you meant it or not, it's art, raw, painful, and honest. The kind of truth that can't be controlled. You don't just expose their lies, you expose yourself, your pain, your strength, all of it. It takes more than talent, it takes courage." I blinked, momentarily speechless. More than a year ago, Margaret had commented on my writing. "You have good technique, but I don't see the depth, the something that dares to touch the wound." The comment had bothered me, though I had only thanked her and backed away. "You said my writing was too smooth, lacking in soul," I said, not confronting her, just wanting to understand. Margaret nodded, simply, and I was right. There was a long pause between us. Then I asked, my voice open, "So what now?" Margaret stepped closer, her eyes shining. "I see a woman who is no longer hiding behind perfect sentences. I see the truth in that video, and I want the world to see it too. If you agree, I would like to publish a collection of your short stories, a personal, independent project called Behind the Curtain. Not just about this wedding, but about everything. The forgotten days of your childhood, the feeling of being invisible in your family, and the journey to reclaim your voice." I felt my breath catch in my throat. I had been prepared for anything after tonight, criticism, blame, even rejection, but not this. A door opened in the rubble. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Margaret looked me straight in the eye. "I don't waste time on trivialities. What you did today wasn't just a moment. It was the culmination of a journey. It deserves to be told." I glanced toward the back of the room, where my father, Henry, sat alone, his head bowed, a smaller figure than ever. This room no longer held me, no longer a place of rejection or painful memories. It was just a stop on the road to something bigger. I turned to Margaret. "When do we start?" I asked. She smiled, a rare but genuine smile. "We have already begun." The morning light in Chicago has a softness that contrasts with the cold opulence of the peninsula's ballrooms. In my new apartment in Logan Square, sunlight filters through the windows, warming the exposed brick walls and casting soft shadows and light on the old wood floors. I'd signed a lease a week after returning from my wedding, feeling a strong urge to start over, not just spatially, but mentally. The apartment was small, but it was mine. A corner was set up as a writing desk, with a laptop, a few notebooks, and an old table lamp. A coffee maker hummed in the corner, exuding a rich aroma that I'd always associated with silence. On the wall, I'd hung 3 short stories printed on heavy paper. One about a street newsboy, his eyes sparkling despite his tattered shoes. Another about an old woman sitting on a park bench, talking about old times. And an unfinished piece, handwritten notes about myself, reflected in the dim light of a morning. Imperfect, but true. My phone rarely rang. Few people called. Those who did call were hesitant, their eyes twinkling as they tried to figure out who I was. One client canceled an interview with a vague message, saying only that something came up. I didn't have to ask. I knew the story had spread farther than I thought. Not my writing, at least not yet, but the scandal. Chicago woman exposes sister's affair at wedding in front of hundreds of guests. News blogs and social media were abuzz with comments. Some praised me for speaking out, calling me brave. Others called me a saboteur or revenge. There was even a podcast called Family Secrets and Public Display. The Ellie Harper affair. It was strange, not exactly pleasant, but I accepted it. Margaret Voss called every week, urging me to focus on my upcoming short story collection. Let the noise die down, she said. It always does. Your story will speak for itself. And it began to do so. The first opportunity came when an editor from Literary Echoes, a prestigious literary magazine, contacted me for an interview not about the wedding scandal, but about the collection of short stories I had submitted to Horizon, called Hidden Corners. I hesitated, worried that this was just another way to exploit the drama. But the editor surprised me. What caught my attention was the honesty of your writing, she said. It's not just what you write about, but how you see things that no one else sees. You don't shy away from the truth. The interview was published, and from there, a quiet ripple began. A retired street guitarist called to ask me to write a piece about his journey. Then an uptown family booked me to record their story, the first time in a decade they wanted to preserve a family memory. A small but prominent literary blog listed me as a writers to watch in 2026, praising the honesty of my stories, without the cold air of objectivity. My schedule filled up, not in a rush, but steadily. More importantly, the people who came to me wanted more than just a piece. They wanted me to see them, to tell their stories without editing them to perfection. They wanted real moments, the kind that lingered long after the ink had dried. One evening, as I was reviewing a manuscript from an interview, my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Voss. The final details for the anthology have been approved. The publication date is set. Show them who you are. I smiled, glancing at the short story on the wall, the handwriting, half light and half dark, like my own. Then I turned back to my laptop, my fingers tapping steadily on the keyboard, no longer hesitating. A new chapter had begun, not with fireworks or apologies from my family, but quietly, surely, like sunlight filtering through a window. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged. In the days after the wedding, Harper's name became a byword in Chicago's elite. What had once been whispered praise turned to open criticism. Lorraine Harper, who had been the centerpiece of charity dinners, literary events, and lavish lunches, suddenly found herself isolated. It began with a cold silence. The calls from event organizers, the text messages confirming regular meetings all stopped. Then came more explicit moves. A brief letter from the Chicago Women's Association, where Lorraine had served on the board, announcing that, due to recent family events, she had been voted unanimously to resign. The Chicago Tribune ran a sharp story, with a gentle but hard-hitting headline about the fall of a once-admired family. Lorraine's longtime friend Patricia Wentworth didn't return messages. Even her regular hair salon on the Gold Coast canceled her regular Wednesday appointments, with a brief apology. Lorraine had always taught Vanessa and me that image was everything, but no amount of silk dresses or smooth voice could save her from this storm. The video went viral, not only exposing Vanessa's betrayal, but also the cruelty in Lorraine's voice, as she spoke of me as if I were a stain on her impeccable tablecloth. It wasn't just a scandal. It was evidence of their true colors, and Chicago high society quickly turned its back. Meanwhile, Henry Harper faced blows that were far more severe than his pride. His family's financial foundation began to crumble. 3 major real estate deals were abruptly canceled. One from a longtime Wisconsin investor, citing reputation concerns. Another from a Michigan resort group, which backed out at the last minute to protect the brand. And a third, a luxury condominium project in downtown Chicago, was canceled without explanation. Henry tried to control the damage, but after each meeting, whispers followed, not about him as a father, not about Vanessa, but about the collapse of an empire his family had once been proud of. At home, the silence was even more painful. Lorraine barely spoke, lost in her own shame and doubt. Vanessa had disappeared from the family home altogether. When she finally called Henry, her voice was hoarse and weak. "Dad, I need help." Henry barely recognized his daughter Vanessa. The pride of the family, the symbol of their ambition, was now a shadow of herself. Nathan not only publicly annulled the engagement, but also cut off all contact. Nathan's mother, Eleanor Townsend, issued a brief but sharp press statement, asserting that the Townsends have no and will have no connection whatsoever with the Harper family. The jewelry company that sponsored Vanessa's last campaign had dropped her contract. The modeling agencies had stopped calling. Her agent refused to answer her phone. Vanessa still had the luxury apartment, the expensive wardrobe, the sparkling heels until she checked her personal savings account, the one she'd set up with Lucas Bennett as a backup if things with Nathan fell through. The balance? 0. She blinked in disbelief, logged back in, still 0. When she called Lucas, his number went straight to voicemail. His last message, a few weeks ago, had read, "Relax, baby. We'll be fine after the wedding." Now his social media accounts were gone, his apartment was empty, and no one she knew where he was. In the dead silence of her apartment, Vanessa sat alone, facing the void she had thought was security. Vanessa sat on the floor of her apartment, her heels still on, her eyes glued to the phone in her hand. Her mascara was long gone, no longer smudged, but her breathing was labored, her mind reeling from a reality she had never dared to imagine. She had been used. She, who had manipulated everything, her fiancé, her family, even me, now realized that the one person she thought she could control, Lucas, had been playing her all along. She didn't cry, at least not right away. But as time passed, and the messages to Lucas remained unread, the shock slowly turned to something darker, the emptiness of losing everything. At home, Lorraine stood by the kitchen window, stirring a cup of tea she had not drunk. The reflection in the glass showed a woman older, smaller, as if time had drained her of her vitality in a matter of days. She had been the queen of charity events and lavish parties, but now the silence in the house weighed more heavily than any failure. There were no more book launches or receptions to attend, no daughters to brag about. All she had was a story that played over and over in the minds of those who had admired her. A story she could not rewrite, a truth she could not silence. The Harper name didn't just fall, it burned. I, Ellie, didn't just destroy a wedding. I exposed a truth that had been hidden behind decades of tailored dresses, perfect family photos, and empty speeches. What happened wasn't revenge, it was liberation. Not just for me, but for anyone who has ever been pushed aside, handed a cold sandwich, and told to smile and shut up. Maybe, somewhere, someone reading this has wondered if speaking up was worth it. I'm here to say, It was. The silence that filled the ballroom after the video was more than just shock, it was the sound of truth echoing in a space that wasn't prepared for it. That's why this story matters. If you've made it this far, I want to ask, what would you do if you were in my shoes, Ellie Harper? Would you walk away quietly, or would you stand up and turn on the screen, letting the truth speak? Leave your thoughts, I read every comment. And if you believe stories like this, the real, unfiltered stories, need to continue to be told, please support me. Next week, I'll bring you another story about another family, another secret, and another woman who refuses to be silenced. This isn't just storytelling, this is vindication. And you'll want to know what happens next. The rain that afternoon fell on the streets of Chicago, carrying a steady, chilly rhythm. In my small apartment in Logan Square, I stood at the kitchen table, adjusting a few pages of a manuscript, while soft jazz played from an old speaker. The air smelled of coffee and printing, a silence I had learned to appreciate. In these drama-free days, no one asked for more than I wanted to give. I had just returned from a meeting with my publisher to approve the final copy of my short story collection when there was a knock on the door, a soft knock, then another, then silence, as if the person outside was hesitating. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door, thinking it might be the delivery man or a student from the community writing class I started teaching on the weekends. But when I opened the door, the air stopped. Vanessa stood there, her hair wet and plastered to her face, her expensive designer coat looking miserable, clinging to her like an unbearably heavy burden. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her arms hanging limply, raindrops rolling down her cheeks, mixing with what might have been tears. I didn't move, my hand on the doorknob, not opening it any further. "I came here," Vanessa said, her voice hoarse, maybe from crying, maybe from the cold. "I didn't know where else to go." The sound of Chicago traffic passed behind her, indifferent. Inside the apartment, warmth awaited, but I didn't invite her in right away. "Why now?" I asked, my voice flat and emotionless. Vanessa shivered, looking down at the wet pavement as if searching for an answer in the cracks. Then she looked up, straight into my eyes. "Because I have nothing left to lie about." The words hung in the air, as fragile as rain. I watched my sister's face, the makeup was smudged, her eyes no longer held the pleading light they used to when she wanted something. They were tired, empty, as if she had been stripped bare. "I'm not asking for anything," Vanessa said quickly, her voice shaking. I need something. Something real. I can clean, run errands, you don't even have to look at me." I backed away from the door, enough to let her in, but not invitingly. "You clean. No talking. Starting from zero," I said, my voice even. Vanessa nodded, as if she'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head. I turned and stepped inside, leaving the door ajar. She followed, shedding her wet coat near the door, her high heels leaving small watermarks on the wooden floor. Her eyes scanned the apartment, the manuscripts, the stacks of books, the soft glow of the desk lamp, but she didn't touch anything. I handed her a mop. "Start there," I said, pointing to the far corner of the room. Vanessa took it, without asking for a towel or a fee. She lowered her head, silently mopping the floor, water forming small puddles at her feet. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and continued editing a few paragraphs. Outside, the rain had reduced to fine dust, but the air in the apartment was still thick, heavy with something unsaid. Forgiveness? Not yet, and probably never will be. But the consequences were there, and with them the first signs of change. Elsewhere, the Behind the Curtains collection launch was a hive of conversation, the clink of champagne glasses, and the slow steps of readers, critics, and publishers. The launch drew a larger crowd than expected, not just because of the praise from literary echoes, but because of my story not just as a writer, but as someone who dared to reveal the truth. Literary critics mingled with book lovers, pausing over each story, reading the words as if they were pieces of a larger puzzle. The behind-the-curtain premiere at a small Chicago bookstore drew both curious locals and seasoned literary critics. I stood near the far wall, away from the stage lights, watching quietly. The stories in the collection were carefully selected. Characters with hard faces, moments of pain held tight, smiles forced on the edge of healing. There was no pretense, no embellishment, just people, as they were. My favorite story, Silent Light, was placed near the exit, a passage describing an elderly man sitting by a window, his eyes lost in space. A small card beside it read, "Sold." Margaret Voss stepped forward, nodding slightly. "You've started something, Ellie. Something real, something necessary." I nodded back, not out of pride, but out of the realization that I'd spent my whole life trying to be seen. Now people weren't just seeing me, they were seeing the world through my writing. A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "Ellie." I turned. Nathan Townsend stood a few feet away, a glass of wine he hadn't touched. His suit was simpler than the one he'd worn on what was supposed to be the wedding day, but he still looked poised and polished. "I didn't think I'd come," he said, smiling faintly. "But I need to say something." I didn't answer, just looked at him, my eyes softening. "You saved me without even knowing it," he continued. "I don't think I really loved Vanessa. I loved the idea of her. The person I thought I should marry. Your video. It was like pulling me out of a dream, and I woke up feeling freer." I nodded. No words needed. He smiled. A genuine smile. "Your work is amazing, Ellie. I hope you never stop." Then he walked away, blending into the crowd, leaving me with a sense of relief, as if a chapter had been closed, making way for something else to come. As the behind-the-curtain premiere wound down, the last guests left, leaving the small Chicago library quiet. I walked to the large window, breathing in the city air through the glass. The wet streets reflected neon lights, taxis whizzed by, and the soft laughter from the bar across the street. Then I saw her, Lorraine, standing under the awning across the street, no umbrella, no companion. Her posture was still proud, her chin slightly raised, but her face was unreadable. She didn't wave, didn't come closer, just stood there, looking at me. We stood there, two women bound by blood, but separated by everything else, the mother who never praised, and the daughter who no longer waited. I didn't call her. Instead, I quietly took my phone from my coat pocket, opened my notes app, and wrote a few quick notes about this moment. Lorraine in the rain, framed by glass and distance. I saved it, initially with just a timestamp, but before I sent the final draft to my publisher, I added a small note. Sometimes, silence says enough. The girl who sat alone at family dinners, who was handed a cold sandwich at her sister's wedding, didn't just survive humiliation. She turned it into art, into truth, into liberation. I didn't need to scream, argue, or beg for love. I just showed the world what was real, and that was enough. If you've read this far, you probably believe, as I do, that silence can be powerful, that the truth doesn't need permission, and that sometimes the deepest betrayals are the clearest mirrors. I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your family? Have you ever swallowed your pain to keep the peace? Share your story. Your truth deserves to be heard. Your comment could be a light to someone, help them feel less alone. If my story, Ellie Harper, touches a part of you, if it stirs a quiet strength within, please share. And if you want to continue this journey, please support me. We are just getting started. There are many voices to be heard, many silences to be broken, and many truths to be brought to light. Because revenge doesn't always require fire. Sometimes, it just requires a pen and a true story.